was not the call of votes, which we do expect to happen here soon. We're now going to go to the sponsor of the bill, Mr. Curtis from Utah. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to explore for a minute this relationship between states with large amounts of federal land in the East Coast and perhaps help my colleagues understand this relationship. Like both of you, Utah has a large amount of public lands, about 42% just for BLM, about 60% over federal lands. And there were no hearings in Utah on this. And I think that kind of shows the heart of the frustration of those of us in the West. I was on this committee and watched the efforts to move the BLM to the West, to Colorado, successfully started and then pulled back. And really saddened that that wasn't completed because, like both of you, we have great relationships with our BLM folks in the state. We meet with them frequently, we talk with them, they understand our perspective. And so this is not an anti-BLM sentiment from us. It's more of a feeling that people who have not been to our states, who won't hold hearings in our states, who won't come to our states, have a degree of hypocrisy in telling us how to manage our lands. And I'd love to give both of you just a second to comment on that relationship. Governor Gordon first.
Well, thank you. And I think actually the good Congresswoman's testimony, Mr. Chairman, somewhat offended me. We invited Secretary Howland to come to Wyoming to do a couple of things, to meet with the tribes on the Wind River Reservation, which have a long conservation standard, and we've worked very closely with them on a number of issues. We also invited her to go look at the Jonah Field, where oil and gas companies are doing remarkable work to save the sage grouse. She demurred from that and instead went to Yellowstone National Park. And it's very frustrating to me when people aren't willing to look at on-the-ground work. And Chaco Canyon is a great example of where, quote-unquote, conservation has led to amazing amounts of erosion. You know, the other thing that I'm particularly frustrated about on this with the lack of hearings and the lack of process on this is that we have both Governor Polis and I, Governor Polis is a Democrat, have written to BLM and said, can we please use indaziflan to control invasive species? We have yet to see them approve the use of that chemical, which would help with, as you know, cheatgrass and other things. It's ironic because USDA has approved it, the EPA has approved it, and yet they're dragging their feet.
I've got a really important question after Governor Noem answers this that will actually tie into that. So, Governor Noem, do you want to respond briefly to this relationship between the East and the North?
Well, it's just, you know, the Congresswoman was wrong in virtually everything that she said. I think that they're trying to cast this narrative that we don't care about the environment or stewardship of our lands. And that we can't work with our local BLM offices. We can. There is the sustained yield is a mandate right now of the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act. So what's interesting to me is that South Dakota is the second largest producing state of renewable energy. That we are regularly in the top 10 of greenest states in the nation, that we are very conservation-minded.
So both of you have led right into the question I want to ask you right now, which is hypothetically, if we could change this and make it outcome-based and say, okay, states, you get to decide the rules of the road, and these are the outcomes we want to produce. We want to make sure these lands are protected. We want to make sure they're preserved. We want to make sure there's recreational opportunities. We want to make sure that any extraction is done appropriately. So here's the rules of the road. And you get to set the terms and conditions. How many of you would like to compete with New Mexico on those terms?
In a heartbeat. We'd beat them every day of the week. You know, that's the reality of it, is because we have less bureaucracy. We did all of these accomplishments and outcomes without mandates. South Dakota doesn't go out there and mandate practices and mandate more taxes to fund government programs to make this work. We do it in partnerships. We have conversations. We have honest working relationships with the people who live there and recognize the value of the land.
This describes this tension that they feel from us, that they interpret as not caring about the lands. But in essence, it's more, please don't tell us that you know better than we do in a place that you've never been, where, by the way, for decades and decades and decades, we have done a fabulous job of this. And I wish we had more time to explore this relationship, but I think you've spoken well. Give us an outcome-based rule, and we'll take it all day long.
Well, and the one thing that Governor Gordon has mentioned is that this rule also trounces on states' rights.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
totally
it takes
get it.
decisions
Right.
we make regarding our wildlife and how we operate away from us and gives it to the federal government. It is about control.
Yeah.
So regardless of what they say,
I
it's
regret I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I yield.